Hey everyone, this is Sandip back with another video. And in today's video, we are going to talk about CSS Flexbox. I know HTML and CSS are the most underestimated technologies. But I can't stress on this point. HTML, I have seen like many experienced developers who write bad HTML and CSS. And I can tell you, to become a great full stack developer, you really need to know HTML and CSS. So today we are going to talk about CSS Flexbox, and CSS Flexbox are going to make your life very easy, when you're going to lay out your application. So let's jump into the video and let's see what's the agenda for the today's video. So obviously, you're going to learn CSS Flexbox in one video. So you can think of this video as a reference guide. So what I'm going to cover in this video, I'm going to start. So there are 5 steps. I've divided this video into 5 steps. So the step 1 will be, we're going to see what is Flexbox. And then we are going to jump into some other terminologies, which I'm going to tell you. Some of the terms which are important, which I'm going to use while explaining CSS Flexbox properties. So these terminologies are really important. Next, we will look into, we'll make a playground. Obviously, this is going to be a practical video where I'm going to show you how to use different CSS Flexbox properties. So to explore all those properties, we'll definitely need a playground. So we're going to create a playground in step 3. Step 4, we're going to talk about container properties. And step 5, we're going to talk about child properties. So think of this video as a reference manual for CSS Flexbox. So whenever you want to learn Flexbox, you can come to this video and get some revision done. And if you're stuck somewhere and you're looking for any specific property, right? So there are so many properties, I can tell you. CSS Flexbox has these many properties. Some are container properties and some are children properties. And all of these properties I'm going to cover in this video. And I'm going to put some timestamp just below this video in the description section. So, maybe you want to understand what is Flex Wrap. So you can just click on that particular timestamp and you can jump into that part of the video and understand Flex Wrap property. So I think that's it. Let's jump into the video and let's talk about the step 1. What's Flexbox? Okay, so first things first. What's Flexbox? What's Flexbox? So Flexbox is an efficient CSS technique to lay out HTML elements on web pages or applications. And the most important thing that you need to focus on is efficient. It's going to make you efficient. You're going to become efficient in what? In laying out your HTML elements on web pages or application. And I can tell you, it's really going to make your life easy, guys. I mean, Flexbox is such a nice technique. Once you know it, it will become really easy for you to lay out your HTML elements in your web application, and that will be really quick. I can guarantee that. So if you're a seasoned web developer or a web designer, you might have searched for something like this. Okay, so this is a question, this question has already popped up, that so many web developers or designers ask on a web: how to center div horizontally and vertically. And if I enter this on Google and if I click on this first link, there are multiple ways of doing it. If you see here, right, there are multiple ways. So there is a one way where you can use position absolute and this top left and this margin left. And if I scroll down more, you see there is this another way where we are using left top again 50% and we are using translate, and there are other ways also. So these are all the like the old ways of centering a div on a page. And now if you ask me today, this has become more like a hack which you're using to center a div on your page. But using Flexbox and like 3 4 properties, you can easily center your dev on the page. I mean, that's the beauty of Flexbox. That's where I'm coming from. It's an efficient CSS technique to lay out HTML elements on web pages and application, and it's really going to make your life easy. You'll be happy to see that how easy it is to lay out your application using Flexbox. Okay, now let's talk about some of the terminology that I'm going to use throughout this video. Because I want you to know these terms when I'm going to refer, when I'm going to talk about main start, main end, cross start, cross end, container, child, all of these terms, I want you to know them before I talk about different properties of CSS Flexbox. So when we are going to talk about CSS Flexbox properties, I'm going to say container. So like in HTML, there are two types of elements we have. We have container elements, we have child elements. Like take the example of div. So div is a container element. It can contain paragraphs, it can contain headings, links, and there are different elements. And a child, like if I talk about paragraph is like a child element. And you definitely you shouldn't put a div inside a paragraph. I mean, that wouldn't be a good idea to have a paragraph, have a div inside a paragraph. Okay, so let's talk about the terms. So Flexbox is going to align your children inside a container. So I'm going to assign a flex property, display flex property, and there will be a flex direction property which I'm going to assign to the container. And based on that flex direction property, your children are going to get aligned either in horizontal direction or in a vertical direction. So when your children are going to align in a row fashion, in a row way, or in a horizontal direction, right? So you're going to have your main axis. The first term which I would like to talk about is a main axis. Your main axis will be x-axis. Okay, and there will be another axis called cross axis, which will be your y-axis. And your main axis is going to have two different points. One will be the main start, and the second one will be the main end. Similarly, you're going to have a cross axis, and inside your cross axis, you're going to have two different points: cross start and cross end. And this is really important. I just want you to remember these names, main start, main end, cross start, cross end, main axis, and cross axis. Just try to remember these names in your mind, because uh, I'm going to refer these terms, and once you know these terms: cross axis, main axis, cross start, main start, cross end, main end, understanding Flexbox properties will become a cakewalk for you. So in case of row, your main axis will be the x-axis, and your cross axis will be the y-axis. Similarly, we are going to have a column. So when your children inside your container, when the children are aligned vertically, right, in that case, your main axis will be y-axis, and your cross axis will become x-axis will become the cross-axis. Okay, and again we are going to have similar terms there also. In case of main axis, we are going to have a main start. So this is your main start, and this is your main end. Similarly, we are going to have on cross-axis a cross start somewhere here, like cross start, or this line cross start, and this will become your cross end. So just remember these terms. They're so important, right? How many terms I talked about? I talked about row, column, I talked about container, I talked about children, I talked about main axis, cross axis, main start, main end, cross start, and cross end. So let's move on and let's get into some coding now. Okay, so enough theory. Let's jump into some code now. And if you see on my screen right now, I have created a folder. Basically, I mean, creating a folder is a really easy task. Just create a folder anywhere, wherever you want in your drive, and I have named that folder CSS Flexbox Props. So we are going to make a playground, because we need a playground to learn and understand different CSS Flexbox properties, right? So I've created this folder, CSS Flexbox props, and inside that, we're going to create two different files. The first one will be quite obvious, it will be index.html, and the second one will be, so I'm going to click on this button, basically, styles, or just style.css. So obviously we're learning about CSS Flexbox, so we need HTML and CSS. And I'm going to put some HTML structure here, HTML5 structure. Maybe I'll try to make it. Okay, so I need to just make it smaller. Just I wanted to show you the name of the folder, and I'm going to give it a title, CSS Flexbox props. Okay, so let's start with simple HTML structure. So I'm going to create one container, and let's start with some children inside that container. So I'm going to use UL. So I'm writing Emmet here. This is a shorter way of writing HTML, and I mean it's really beautiful if you know Emmet. So you can write UL and alias one by one, but that's going to take some time. To save some time, I'm going to create a UL, and inside that I'm going to create 5 different LIs, and each li is going to have child. Okay, so I want to create, I'll start with 3 basically. Let's go with 3. So 3 child. Okay, so I'm going to press enter. See that? I got UL and li, child 1, child 2, and child 3. So I'm going to save it, and let's run this in live server. So live server is one of the uh, live server is basically used to run your HTML5 basically, and it's already running, I think so, somewhere. So I just need to open it. So that will be localhost 3000 probably. No, localhost. Okay, I'm going to stop it and run again. So if I see here it is running already, so I'm going to open with live server, and it's going to open my HTML file in my browser. So you see here, right? I got 3 different children. So I'll show you the structure here. So I'm going to inspect, and let's see the structures. My UL is my container, which is a block level element, and these LIs are again block level elements. They are the children. So I got 3 children. Let's write some CSS. So I'm going to target my UL, and let's give my UL padding of 0 and margin of 0 pixel. I'm going to save, and let's use the property called list style of none. So now if I save and go back, see here, I'm going to refresh. Well, it's not working. It's not working because I haven't imported my CSS file. So let's import our CSS here. So I'm going to use link for that, link style sheet, and I'm going to refer my style.css file. Now if I save and go back, see that? I have my UL and LIs, and you see that margin and padding is gone. Those bullets are gone. Now let's put some styling to our li elements also. So I'm going to target all the li's, and let's give it a background color maybe. So I'm going to give it a background color of aqua, and let's give it some padding. So probably I'll go with 2 rem. Let's start with 1 rem, probably 1 rem of padding, and let's give some margin bottom also. Maybe I'll go with 1 rem for margin bottom. Now if I save and go back and see here, see that it's looking good. And let's put some padding around our container element also. I'm going to use 1 rem padding around my container, and I'm going to give some background color to my container also. So let's go with beige color probably. Let's see. So see that? So we have our parent and child structure created here. This is our playground. Okay. And when we're not using Flexbox, you see the default alignment of HTML, right? So like this UL is block elements, block level elements. So you see it has created this entire box. And inside that UL, these LIs are also block level elements, right? So those LIs I have created here. So I think our playground is ready. Let's move on and let's jump into understanding different flex box properties, and we'll start with containers properties first. So obviously in flexbox we should have a container, and in our case our container is ul. So we'll start with ul, our container, and we'll understand all the container properties, and then we will move on and we'll talk about child properties. So let's jump into the container properties. Okay, let's jump into our first flexbox container property. So the first property which we are going to talk about is display flex. I mean, you see here flex direction. Obviously, we'll start with flex direction property. But first of all, we need to convert our container into a flex container, because normally when we see here, right, this container, this is normal block container, right? It has a display of block. So we need to convert our UL, this UL. If I show you the CSS here, probably styles, I'm not able to expand styles somehow. Let me try this. I don't know why I'm not able to expand my styles. Or computed styles, and somehow it's not going down. Basically, I don't know why it's not going down. Maybe I'll try to scroll up. Okay, so let me try to scroll it up. Okay, so by default, if I select my UL, it has a display of a block. If I select my UL, basically this UL tag, right? So it's going to have a display of block. So let's continue and convert our container, our UL element into a flex container. And to do that, it's really easy. You just need to write display flex. There must be something wrong. I'm not using semicolon here, so I need to use semicolon. So you just need to give display flex. And now I'm going to save, and you're going to see some differences when I switch back to my HTML. See that? My children, I mean, if I remove this display flex, just look at it, right? When I remove this display flex and save, if I go back, my children are vertically aligned, but as soon as I put display flex, by default, what happens? Now the children are aligned from left to right because of this property. So by default, the first property which we're going to talk about is a flex direction. So once you make your container, as a flex container, it gets a direction of a row by default. So all the children inside your flex container are going to align from left to right. And we talked about the axis also, and this is important. Whenever we use flex direction row, your main axis will be your x-axis and your cross axis will be your y-axis. So in our case, our main axis is this one from left to right, and our cross axis is this one from top to bottom. This is really important. I'm going to refer about this axis terminology so many times in this video. Okay, so I need some padding probably for my children. I think I have put some padding, but still I don't know. Okay, I need some margin basically. So I'm going to go back and let's add some margin right also. So I have used margin bottom. Now let's use some margin right. I'm going to undo this. Let's use some margin right. So margin right. And let's give it a margin right of 1 rem. I'm going to save. And see that now I have some spacing in my children. Okay, so flex direction. So I can use flex direction, and by default the flex direction value is a row. So when I say row, and if I save and if I go back and refresh, you see no difference because by default the direction. So whenever you want to align your children from left to right, you're going to use flex direction as a row. Inside your container, all the children will be aligned from left to right. Now we have different values, different option for flex direction. So you see here, right, row in case of row, it is aligned on main axis from left to right. I can use row reverse also, and let's try this. Let's try row reverse and save it, and you see the difference here. If I go back, see that? Now it is starting from right to left. So child 1, child 2, and child 3. So all the children are going to align from right to left. Really simple. And this is how the flex direction row work. Let's talk about column now. And column also got two different variation. So by default, I mean, you can give column and you can give column reverse also. And in both the cases, okay, so in case of row, your main axis is x-axis, and when you change it to column, your main axis also changes. It's your main axis changed to y-axis. So let's first talk about column. So I'm going to change flex direction to column, and let's see what changes we see. So I'm going to give flex direction of column, save, and now if I go back, see that it's like how we had, it's similar to how we had when we had our initial HTML structure, right? So child one, so your children inside a container are going to align from top to bottom. And this is really important. When you use flex direction as column, your main axis will be a column. It's really easy, right? When you say your flex direction as row, your main axis is row. I mean, it's x-axis, and when we say your flex direction as column, your main axis changes to y-axis and your cross-axis changes to x-axis. Now let's try column reverse as well. So I'm going to use column reverse, save, and now if I go back, see that now my children are starting from bottom, right? So in case of just column, they were starting from top to bottom. Now they're starting from bottom to top, child one, child two, child three. This is how you can use your first flex container property, and this is a really important property called flex direction. So based on your requirement, like maybe you need to align your children on horizontal axis, you can use row. And when you want to align your children in top to bottom order, right, in column, so you can use flex direction as column. Let's move on and talk about the next property called flex wrap. Okay, now let's talk about our next flex box container property called flex wrap. And this is really easy to understand property. So first of all, I need to change my structure a bit here. So I need to add some more children basically. So I'm going to add some more children here. So I'm going to add maybe 4, 5, and 6. Let's add some more. Maybe I'll go with 9 children. So 7, 8, and 9. Okay, so I have 9 children now, and I'm going to change some CSS also. So instead of column reverse, now I'm going to go back to row basically, or maybe I can remove flex direction property also, because by default flex direction is row, and I'm using different margin here, margin bottom. So I'm going to just give it a margin property now, and margin of 1 rem would do for me. I'm going to save, and now if I go back and see that, so right now I have so many children that my container cannot contain. So my container size, you see here, right? So when I see like this ninth child, it's getting overflow out of my container, right? It's going out of the container size. So in such cases, and if you see here, this is a 5 number, it's coming, it's breaking it, and it's wrapping, it's not coming on one line. So when you want to wrap your children, right? So your children will start from left to right in case of flex direction row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you want your children to come down when like when we write, right? So when you have a paper and if you're writing on that, when that particular area gets over, you go down and you start writing from the left, something like that. If you want to do, you can do that using flex wrap property. So there is something called wrap which we can use, and there is something called flex wrap reverse. So there are two different options we have for the flex wrap. So let's do that. Let's use flex wrap first. So I can say flex wrap, and there are multiple options here. So by default, the wrap is no wrap. I'm going to use wrap, and now if I save and go back, see that? So when the child 1, child 2, child 3, so now child 8 is not having space on the right hand side. That's why it went down. Okay, inside a container, I don't have a space. That's why child 8 went down. And it's like writing, from left to right. If you want to write from right to left, probably you can use wrap reverse. So there is another option. You will start from right, you'll go to left, and then probably you'll go up. So this is the structure I have created here. It will start from bottom, it will go until here, then it will write something like this. So let's see how it works. Wrap reverse, I'm going to show it to you. So let's just add reverse here, and now if I save and go back to my application, see that starting from left, again starting from left, child 1, child 2, child 3, but it's wrapping in the reverse direction. So I don't think so I have ever used wrap reverse, but maybe a scenario where you want to use wrap reverse. So mostly we use flex wrap with the value of wrap. And so this is about flex wrap, really easy property to understand. Let's move on and talk about our next property. Okay, so let's move on and talk about our next property, which is a flex flow property. And flex flow is it's a new property, but it's a behavior is like a combination of two properties. So we can use combination of flex direction and flex wrap in just one property called flex flow. So let's quickly see the flex flow property. So I'm going to go back to my code editor and I'm going to remove both of them. So as I said, flex direction and flex wrap. So I don't need to use both of them. If I remove both of them, and if I come back and if I see here, right now I'm getting default behavior. So my direction, flex direction is row. Now I'm going to use flex flow, and now I can use two different combination here. So I'm going to use, probably I'll go with a column. So I want my children to flow as a column, right? So this is a direction, and maybe I can use wrap also. Now I haven't shown you about wrap, how the columns actually gets wrapped. So let's try to do that here. So, and I want wrap to be wrap actually. Okay, so this is a combination of direction and wrap. So now I'm going to save, and if we go back, you see here, I mean, my direction is column, but still I don't see the wrapping. I don't see the wrapping because my container is getting uh, resized based on my children. So I'm going to give some, I'm going to resize my children basically. Sorry, my container basically. So let's give some size to our containers. I'm going to give it a height, fixed height of, say, suppose maybe I'll go with 100 rem probably. Let's try this, how it looks. No, 100 rem is much more actually. Let me go with 50 rem probably, and let's see, it's still bigger. I need to go with 10 rem probably. Let's try this. So 10 rem and column wrap. Still, I don't know why it is not working. Maybe I'll try with some pixel here, like 300 pixel maybe. Let's try with the rem and pixelers. I mean, they should work. Let's try 300 pixels. See that? So 10 rem was a bit less actually. Let me try 20 rem because I like to use rems. I'm going to remove this 3 from here, and let's save. You see that? So now let's see, the children are starting 1, 2, 3, and as the container's height, I have reduced the container height. You see here, right? The children are wrapping. They're wrapping in column fashion. So in row, they wrap from left to right and then bottom. In column also, they start from top to bottom, and as there is no space below the container, right, they're wrapping to the next column, then to the next column. So when you want to combine flex direction and flex wrap property together, probably you can use flex flow. It's a shorthand or a shortcut for using two properties together. Let's move on and talk about the next property now. Now let's talk about our next Flexbox property, that's called justify content. And this is one of the most important property. I mean, you're going to use this property so many times. So what's the meaning of justify content? It align items. Okay, remember, it align items along the main axis. And I told you that main axis, cross axis, they are really, really important concept. And now we are going to talk about those concepts in practical, right? So it align items along the main axis, and these are the different values or different options we have for justify content. So let's go back to our code editor now, and I have used flex flow. I'm going to change it to so flex direction. So direction property plays a really important role here. So you need to remember that. So I'm going to use flex direction as a row for now. And if I go back and if we go back to our application, I see like flex, and I'm using a display flex direction. There's padding, margin, and I because I have given the height. Let's remove the height also for now. That's why all those children, they're getting that height. And I don't need so many children now, right? So I'm going to go back to my initial setup where I had 3 children. So this is it. Okay. So now let's talk about next property called justify content. So justify content align items along main axis. Now, in case of row, so if I go back to axis row, in case of row, what is the main axis? In case of row, the main axis is x axis. So it's going to align all my children on the main axis. Okay. So what's the main axis? It's x axis in case of the row. So if I go back to my styles and if I use align, okay, sorry, justify content, and if I say, now there are different values, right? And the default value is flex start. I'm going to use default value only. So if I say flex start, if I go back to my application, you see that. So this is the default value, flex start. Okay. And if I go back to this diagram also, this is the main start, right? So we are talking about a main axis. So your children will be aligned to the main start, this line. I can use other values like let's go with the flex end. So start is this one. So what will be the flex end? Flex end will be the main end. So my children are going to shift to the right hand side and it will align at the main axis end. Okay. So let's go back and try this property. So let's start with flex. Let's try flex end. I'm going to save. And if I go back and see that all the children, now the order of children is not changing, right? So it's like, think of my children as a container, and entire container has been shifted from left to the right because this is flex start. This line is flex start because in case of row, my main axis is x axis, and along the x axis all the properties are getting applied. Okay, so this is flex start, this is flex end, and you can guess the next value. What is the next value for justify content? The next one is center. So let's try center now. And this is really important, to center our element, right? We used to do auto, zero auto, right? If you remember that, margin, zero auto. And now I'm going to go back and see. So you see that my children are now aligned center. Now these other values, right? Space between, say, space around and space evenly. Let's try that also. So let's try space between first. So I'm going to use space between and I'm going to save. And if I go back, you see that now my children is having equal space in between them. And you see the space on the left hand side remains as it is, and the space on the right hand side remain as it is, but the space between my children is now same. It's consistent, right? Now let's try the next one, that is space around, and this is going to do something different. So let's try space around, and if I save and go back to my application, see that space around means whatever distance we have here, whatever space I have here, same space I have here, same space I have here, same space I have here. So I've created a diagram for this. I just wanted to show you. So in case of flex start, it looks like this. In case of flex end, it looks like this. Center, space between, this distance is same. And in case of space around, you see that, right? Whatever distance we have here, the similar distance we have on the right hand side. Then again, the next child is going to have same distance on the left hand side and right hand side, and next child is also going to have same distance on the left hand side and right hand side, same space or a distance. Space, I would say. Space is good thing. Let's try space evenly now, and this is going to have same space on each direction, that is left and right. So I'm going to use space evenly. And now if I save and go back to my application, see that we have this is x, this is x, this is x, this is x. So we have even space on left, right. So basically inside my container, my children have even space. So you can use all of these options, just feel free to experiment with these options, because experimentation, practically trying these options by yourself, is really important. Now all of these things are applied on row, and as I said, all these properties, the center, space between, space around, it works on main axis, and in case of row, the main axis is x-axis. Now I'm going to change it to column, and I'll show you. So now instead of row, we'll go with that is column, and I'm going to use the default value of like start. Okay, now if I save, my children are going to align in column fashion, right? I'm going to increase my height also, because I need to show you. So let's increase the container height to, maybe I'll go with, last time I have used 30 rem or 20 rem, I don't remember now. Let's see, 20 rem. Okay, I need to increase it more. Let's go with 40 this time. Okay, so I have right height. Now by default, flex start means, now in case of column, I have changed flex direction to column, right? And when we use column, right, my main axis is y-axis. So now my children are going to align. If I use justify content, my children are going to get aligned on the main axis, that is y-axis. So my main start will start at the top. When in case of row, my main start was starting at the left, but now it is starting at the top, and my main end will be at the bottom, like we had our main end at the right hand side in case of a row. It's like, I mean, initially it's really confusing, but once you understand this concept of main axis and cross axis, I think it will become easier. Okay, so now let's try flex end, and you will see the children are shifted at the bottom, right? Let's try the center one. So all the things will be similar, but only thing is they are aligned on different axes. See, they are on center. Let's try the other things. So I have this one here. I have created this all of these diagrams, just to show you. Let's try space between. So we are going to have same distance between our children. So let's try space between, and I'm going to save and go back. See that I have same space between my children. Let's try the next one, that is space around, and I'm going to use space around. Save, go back. See that I have, this is x, this is x, this is x, this is x, something like this. So space around. Let's try space evenly, the last option, and save and go back. See that I have equal amount of space on the top and bottom of my children. So this is a really important property, and justify content you're going to use so many times while laying out your application for sure. So just understand the concept. In case of row, when your flex direction, so justify content is highly dependent on your direction. So when your flex direction is row, your children are going to align on the main axis, and the main axis is x-axis. When you have flex direction of column, your children are going to align on the y-axis, and y-axis will be your main axis. Let's move on and talk about the next property. Okay, now let's talk about the other property called align items. So this is opposite to justify content. So we talked about justify content, and what justify content does, it align items along the main axis, and main axis depends on your flex direction. If it is row, the main axis will be x-axis. If it is column, the main axis will be y-axis. And align your items across cross axis. You get that? So we have something called main axis. So when there is a row, our main axis is this one, right? The x-axis, and the cross axis is actually the y-axis, the vertical one, right? So we can use align items to align your items either on top or bottom in vertical direction in case of row. So let me try this basically. So we're going to go back and I'm going to use go back to row and justify content. I'm going to remove justify content for now. I don't need justify content. I need a semicolon here, and I'll go back to I'll keep the height on here because I want to show you like how it aligns across the cross axis. Now if I go back to my application, if you see, right, the children, right, they're getting stretched because that's the default behavior. Okay, now let's move on and try align items, and I'm going to align my items using a flex start. So let's try flex start first, and now if I go back, see that default stretch behavior, because the default value of align items is stretch. This is the default value of align items. That's why my elements are getting stretched. But if I change it to flex start, you see that, because in case of row, what's the cross axis? The cross axis is y axis, right? And it's starting on top, right? And it is getting that this is the flex start. In case of a row, the cross axis starts here and it ends here. Now let's try the next one, which is flex end. So I'm going to give the value of flex end, and it's going to align on the cross axis at the bottom. See that? Came on the bottom, right? And let's try the next value. Again, that's a really easy, center. So let's align vertically using center. And if I go back, see that? Now, as I told you, right, initially when we started this video, I told you how to align a particular div or particular container at the center of the screen, right? So in case of our items, right, our li items, how I can align them to the center of my container. In this case, my container is ul, right? So I can use the combination of justify content and align items property to do that. And we don't need to use all those hacks which we talked about, right? So let's do that. So I'm going to use justify content center and align item center, and you will see children are aligned at the center. So easy, right? That's why I said, Flexbox is really interesting, and you should definitely use Flexbox for laying out your application. See, just two properties, justify content center, because justify content works on my main axis, and in case of a row, my main axis is x-axis, right? And so justify content works on x-axis and align item works on cross-axis. So in case of row, my cross-axis is y-axis. See that? That's why the children are coming at the center. So let me remove justify content for now, and now I'm going to change the direction to column. So once I change the direction to column, my main axis is going to become the y-axis, and my cross-axis is x-axis. So you see here I have this value, right? Align item center. That's why it is coming center on the x-axis. If I say flex start, you'll see it will come on the left hand side, and if I say flex end, it's going to come on the right hand side. So these are the most commonly used properties. We use flex start, flex end, and center. Also there is something called baseline also. Probably I'll show you the baseline example. Let me try to create a baseline example. So I'll go back to row and flex start. Okay, and what happens in this case, it is here. Now I'm going to use, probably let me target my first li element. I'm going to target the first child probably, and let me give it a padding top of, say, I don't know, I'll go with 5 rem probably. Let's see what happens. So now it is aligned. I have the height is increased, and this is a padding. Now I have used, let me try to use baseline now, because flex start I have used. Let me try to use baseline if it has any impact here. So I'm going to, instead of flex start, I'm going to use baseline, and let's see what happens. So see that? So when we use flex start, when you use baseline, basically, baseline means this text, right? So your children, they align, they don't start at the top. They basically align their baseline. What is a baseline? Baseline is nothing but the bottom of this text. So if you see, the entire text is aligned together. So this is baseline, right? And if you want to see, probably you can search for the flexbox baseline, and you'll get the visuals also for that align item. So probably this is one of the article probably we can refer. So you see here, right, baseline. So this line, they align, all the items align on the baseline. So I don't think so I have used baseline so many times, but if you want to use, you can use it. The mostly used properties are flex start, flex end, and center. And align items align your item across cross axis. In case of row, your cross axis is your y axis. In case of column, your cross axis is x axis. So I'm going to stop here. Let's move on and talk about the next property. Okay, now let's talk about the next property called align content, which align your items along the cross axis. And you must be thinking, okay, what's the difference between align items and align content? Just a name, right? So align items along cross axis, and align items along the cross axis. So what's the difference? And there is a difference I wanted to show you. So first of all, for that, I need to use flex wrap, and I need to add some more elements to my HTML, some more children. So let's add some more children. So I'm going to put some more children here. Let's give it name 4, 5, 6. Let's add some more. So 7 and 9. So I have 9 children now, and I'll go back to my style, and let's use, I'm using a row, and I'm going to use flex start for this. I'm using align items, okay, and flex start. And let's see what happens. So now it is getting overflow. I need to remove that padding also. I'm going to remove this one. See that? So now I'm going to use flex wrap. So let's use flex wrap here, flex wrap, and I'm going to save wrap. So what happens? See that? Look at the distance, right? This distance between the first row and the second row. As my children are getting wrapped, you just observe at this distance. And sometimes, you don't like it, right? I mean, you don't want this distance to be there. In that case, this property is going to help, the align content property. So you can use align content so that you feel like you're writing from left to right, and then again you start writing your children, or start aligning your children from here and not from here. So for that purpose, we use align content. And if I say align content and go back, see that? I mean, this is great, this is looking good, because this is how I want my alignment to start when I have my children wrapped, right? So in case of wrapping. So this is where this is a small difference between align items and align content that you need to remember. And everything else is similar. I mean, you can use other properties like we have used flex start. Let's try with the flex end also. So I can use flex end, and it's going to behave in a similar manner, but it will start from the bottom, right? I can use center also, and they're going to like stay together. I'm going to use center just for one more example. When I say center, let's go back and see they're together, right? They're not going away from each other. And if I use align items, you will see the difference in case of center also. If I use align item, see that there is so lot of space between the first line and the second line. To avoid that, you can use align content. So this is just a subtle small difference between align items and align content, which I wanted to talk about. So I think we're good. We're done with all the container properties. So these are all the properties. So I talked about flex direction, wrap, flow, justify content, align items, and align content. So these are the most widely used container properties of Flexbox. Now we know like how to use container properties. Let's move on to the next part of the video where I'm going to talk about the children properties. Now we're going to apply, because if you have seen, like when I use container properties, it moves the entire all the children together. But sometimes, I want to apply the flex start, flex end, or center properties to individual children, right? The single, or of this child or this child, any child, right? Any specific child. And to do that, for that purpose, we have children properties. So let's talk about children properties. Let's take a quick pause here, come back, and we'll talk about children props. Now, I have covered all the container properties, and these are the properties that I have covered related to container. And now we need to move on, and now I'm going to move on and talk about children properties. So sometimes, obviously you will, when I use, or when we use container properties, we are basically moving all of the children either in the horizontal axis or the vertical axis. But sometimes, we need to target the individual child of our flex container, and we need to align them maybe on the left side, right side, center, horizontal, vertical, right? And maybe you need to change the order of the individual elements or individual child. So now we're going to talk about the children properties. There are so many children properties are there in Flexbox, and these are the properties which we are going to talk about. So let's start with the order first, and this is a really easy property to talk about, the order property. So what I can see right now, okay, maybe I need to do some changes in my HTML structure. So right now I'm using display flex direction is row. I'm using wrap align contents. I'm going to remove some of these CSS, and I'll go back and refresh. Okay, by default, and I don't need so many children. Probably I'll go with 6 childrens for now. Okay, and by default it's stretch flex direction row, display flex direction row, and I think I have given some height also. So let me remove the height from the UL. Okay, now if you want to target the individual children, maybe like take the example of child 3, right? You want this child 3 to be at the first place, right? So you can change the order of the children, and for that purpose we use the order property. So what order property does, it changes the order of the items. So we can use 0, 1. So let me try to use this properties. So right now my flex direction is a row, which is by default row. And now I'm going to target the child number 3, this child, right? So we need to target this child. So probably I can use a selector called li with nth child, and I'm going to target the third child. This is the right one. Okay, nth child, and I'm going to say order, and let's give it order of 1, or maybe let's try with 0 first. And now if I go back and see, refresh, I don't see any changes, or maybe my it's not targeting that particular child. Maybe first I'll try with the background color. So let me change the background color just to see if I have targeted the correct child or not. Yes, we are targeting the right child, but the order is not changing. So probably let me try with 1 and save. Okay, so 1 is taking my child at the end. Okay, so this okay. So I think this has been moved out of the order, and it moves into the positive direction. So 1 will make this child as a first child. So probably if I target child 4 and give it a value of 2, so I'm going to target li nth child, and let's target the first one. Okay, and I'm going to make its order as 2. So it's going to come after the child number 3. So I'm going to save, and if I come back, see that? Now the child was coming at the index or at the position of 2. So it's basically there is a normal order which has been followed inside the Flexbox container. And when we specifically give the order property to any of the item or any of the child inside the container, it takes that child out of the ideal, I mean, out of the basic order of your Flexbox container, and it moves into its own specific order. Let's try some negative values also. So I think 0 is a default value. So if I say 0, right, this is a default value, it will take back that particular child to whichever position it was there previously. I can try negative values also. Probably let me try -1, and probably it should come before this child, right? So it's coming before child 2. So you can either go in the positive direction, or you can either go in the negative direction using the order property, and you can rearrange the children inside your Flexbox container. Let's try to change the direction to column. So it's going to work in a similar way like how it is working for row. Only thing is the direction which will change to the vertical direction. That's what it is happening. It's following the same order. If you see, right, child 3 is -1, and this child 1 I have given 1. So you can use positive values, you can use negative values to change the order of items inside a Flexbox container. Let's move on and talk about next property. Now let's move on and talk about the next property called Flex Grow. And this is really important and very useful property of Flexbox children. So what Flex Grow does, and I actually wanted to show you, then you're going to understand like how this property works. So I'm going to remove some of the children from my application first. So I'm going to keep 1 2 3 3 child only inside my HTML, and probably I'll go with the row, or maybe I'll remove this flex direction column. So by default it's a row, and I'm going to remove this background color also, and probably I can comment the order property also. Let me comment this one. Okay, so now if I go back to my application and refresh my page, you see child 1, child 2, child 3. By default, these children's, they take the space, like whatever space they have inside them, right? Like in case of child 1, whatever the length of this text, this child 1 is there, it's going to have that much width, like this child 2. So they're taking the space of the container based on their individual width. Now sometimes, we want, and if you see like child 1, child 2, child 3, they're taking their own space, but we still have some of this space available here in the container, right? And sometimes we want some of the children to stretch and occupy the available space inside the Flex container. Say suppose you want to occupy the entire space which is available here by child 3. How can you achieve that? So first of all, we need to target child 3. That's what Flex Grow actually does. So I'm going to target child 3. So here I'm targeting child 3, and I'm going to use Flex Grow property, and I'm going to, by default, Flex Grow value is 0. Okay, so I'm going to give value of 0 and save. If I come back and refresh, see that nothing has happened. It's in a way like how it was previously, right? Now I'm targeting child number 3, and I'm going to give it a value of flex grow 1. So when you give that value of 1, the magic is going to happen. Now if I come back, see that now child 3 is taking the entire available space. So think in this way, right? Whatever available space is there, okay, that has been occupied by child number 3. Now say suppose I want to divide that available space into 50-50 between two children. How can I achieve that? Maybe I want child 1 to take the 50% of available space and child 3 to take 50% of available space. And we can do that. That's really easy. So I'm going to target child 1. So I'm already targeting child 1 here, and I'm going to use flex grow here, and I'm going to give it a value of 1. Now, see the magic. Now, whatever available space was there, say suppose it was 200 pixel, 100 pixel has been taken by child 1, this child, and 100 pixel was taken by child 3. I can experiment with these values, to come up with right alignment for my application or right width of my individual children, right? Say suppose I want to increase the width of child 3. I want child 3 to take more space than child 1. We can do that. If you want to do that, just increase this value to 2. And now it is going to occupy twice the available space than child 1. So in comparison, child 1 is definitely going to take some available space, but child 3 is always going to take double the value of the space which child 1 is taking. If you see here, right? That's what is happening here. So I think flex grow is a really useful property, and I think I'm using it so many times while laying out my HTML elements in my applications. So this is one of the property that definitely you should consider when you are using Flexbox. Now let's move on and talk about the next property. Now let's talk about the next important property called flex shrink. This is again one of the most important children property, and it controls the size of the children, stops children from shrinking its size. I'm going to tell you practically what that means. Default value is 1. Make it 0 if you don't want children to resize. Now I'm going to show you some behavior first of all in the application. Now if you see here, right, this child 1 is taking some of the space, child 2 and child 3. Now I'm going to resize my application a bit. So you see the behavior, right? The childrens are getting shrinked, right? And once I resize more and more and more, you will see that these numbers, this 1 2 3, they came down, right? They were here on the same line, but now they came down. So by default, my children get shrink, right? I mean, it can't shrink more than that, but that's what the behavior is, right? By default, your children will shrink if you resize your application. And sometimes, we want our children to not to shrink. Maybe I don't want my child want to shrink. Maybe I have some important, maybe a contact number, or maybe some important data which I want to show to the users, right? And I don't want it to shrink into multiple lines. I can do that using flex shrink. So as I said, flex shrink has a default value of 1. So if I go back to my application, if I target child number 1, and if I say flex shrink 1, and I'm going to say nothing is going to happen. I'll just resize once again for you. See that the shrink is still happening. Still, this 1 is coming down, right? So I'm going to target child number 1, and I'm going to remove flex grow, or maybe I'll comment it, and I'm going to use flex shrink which I'm already using, and I'm going to give it a value of 0. So I don't want my child 1 to shrink. Okay, and maybe I'll give it some width also, just to show you. Maybe I have some important data and that I know that it's going to take this amount of width. So maybe I'll go with 2 rem, or probably I'll use 10 rem, and I'm going to save. So child 1, you see that, right? It's taking some of the width of my container. Now I'm going to resize my application once again. See that nothing is happening with child 1, obviously because I have removed the flex grow value. But let's see what happens when I shrink more. You see that child 1 is not at all resizing, right? Because I have given it a value of flex shrink of 0. So by default, it's 1. By default, your flex items or flex children are going to get shrink. But if you want to avoid that shrinking of your children, and you want to go with some specific width for your children, and that width has to be there, you can use flex shrink property. Because if I remove this flex shrink, and I keep this width of 10 rem, and still if I try to see that it's getting resized even if I have the width set. So whenever you want your children to not to shrink, just use flex shrink with a value of 0, and your children will maintain their width, whatever width you have given to your children or flex items. Now let's move on and talk about the next property. The next property which we are going to talk about is flex basis. And let's see what it does first. So it defines the initial size of the flex items or children. So the default value of this property is auto. It's related to flex grow, but grow takes available space. It takes assigned value space. When resized, grow affects first, and after that flex basis. So a lot of theory. Let's look at it practically. I mean, it's difficult to understand while I'm reading something and trying to explain something. So let's explore. So the first point is it defines the initial size of the flex item. So say suppose you want to target your first child, this child one maybe, right? And maybe you want to give it a initial size, the starting value or starting width or height, whatever, right? And you want to kickstart with that. You can do that using flex basis property. So I'll go back to my code. Probably I'll remove this flex shrink for now. And I have, for my child one, I have 10 rem as a width. I'm going to use same, I would say. Let me try, and I think I'm using grow also, so I'm going to comment this grow property also just to show you one property at a time. So let's do this. So instead of giving width, I'm going to comment this width again. And let's use flex basis on our first child, and maybe I'll go with 20 rem as a value. I'm going to save. It's like width actually, the initial width which we are giving. I don't know, it's not working. Okay. So child one, you see, child one is taking that 20 rem value which I have given to it. If you right, so whenever you want your child to have a initial width, right, you can use flex basis. Now you might be thinking, what's the difference between giving a initial width and giving initial flex basis value, right? So the difference come when you resize your window. So just observe, when I'm going to resize my application or my browser window, you see that, right? First these childs are going to get affected, okay, and after that this one is going to get affected. See that? So when you want to give that initial value, you can use flex basis. Now flex basis and flex rem are related to each other. Okay, so how flex grow, so related to flex grow, but grow takes available space. It takes assigned value, but when resized, grow affect first and after that flex basis. So let's try to give let's target the child number 3, and let's give it a value of flex grow. So I'm going to target child number 3. So I have my child number 3 here. I'm going to just copy and paste this part once again, and I'm going to use flex grow of 1, and I'm going to save. When we go back, right, so this child 1 is taking 20 rem, and child 2, it's taking default width. Now the child 3 is taking the available space. Now the thing, what's going to happen when I'm going to resize, you see that this is not getting affected. So whatever initial width I have given to this child, it's not resizing. The first thing which is going to affect it is the rem value, is the grow value. So you see that child 3 has a grow value, right? So first of all, the grow, whichever items I have given the flex grow value, they're going to get affected. And only after that, you'll see the flex basis the children which has the items which has flex basis property, they're going to get affected. So pretty good property, I would say, flex basis. Whenever you want to kickstart with any default width for your children, you can use flex basis property. uh, yeah, I mean, I can say it's a useful property. Let's move on and talk about the next property. Now, now let's talk about the very important property called align self. This is really important, and you're going to use this property so many times. So align self aligns individual items. Now, we talked about justify content, we talked about align items and align content, right? So this property is similar to those property only, but it align individual items across cross axis. Okay, and aligns, and the default aligns according to the parent align items property. So let's see it practically actually, but obviously you need to understand this cross axis and main axis which I have talked about, right? When I have covered when I covered the terminology behind it, right? The main axis and the cross axis. So this is really important. So let's go back. Align self, align individual items across cross axis. So in case of row, so obviously it depends on the flex direction property also. So let's try this property. So now I'll go back to my code, and I don't need this flex basis now. I'll remove it for now, and I'll remove the flex grow also. Okay, so when you want to move your items, individual items, along the cross axis, you can use this property. So in our case, if you see, my container is a flex, and I have a direction by default. I have a flex direction of row. That's a default value for the flex direction. Okay, so in case of so when I have flex direction of a row, you see here, right? My main axis is a horizontal axis, that is x axis, and my cross axis is actually y axis, right? This one. And what align self has to say, align individual items across cross axis. So in case of row, the cross axis is a vertical axis, the y axis. So it's going to align any specific child along y axis. So it's opposite, right? So let's target some of the items. Probably I'll target the item number 2 this time. So I'm going to copy this one and I'm going to paste it here. And this time I'm going to target child number 2. I'm going to save first. I'll go back to my application and see. Okay, so I have my child 1, child 2, child 3. Now I'm going to give some width to my, because in case of flex direction row, my cross axis is vertical, right? And to see align self in action, I need to give some height to my container. So I'm going to target the UL, and let's give some height to it. Probably I'll go with 20 rem. Let's try with this value, or maybe I'll try with higher value like 40 rem. And if I see, okay, you see here, right? By default, it's stretching also. So it has to say aligns according to the parents align items property value. Parents align item. So I'm going to use align item. Now we'll go back to align item, and what align item does. Align item aligns item across the cross axis. So I'm going to use align items first. So let me go back, and I'm going to target my container, and I'm going to say align items flex start. Now this is going to remove that stretch behavior also. If I go back, right? So now across the cross axis, all of my children are aligned at the start. Okay, at the top. Now I'm going to target this child 2, and I'm going to use align self. So maybe I need this particular particular child, actually, the child 2 to align at the center, right? So by default, it's align at the top because I have given align items property as flex start. I'm going to use align self, and I'm going to align this one to flex end. Let's try with flex end first. So flex end. So by default, I want to show the default value also. By default, it's flex start. Nothing has changed. Now I'm going to use flex end, and you will see the difference. See that? When you want to align individual child, you can use align cell property. Maybe I want to target this child, child number 3, and I want to align it at the center. And I can do that. I can target my child number 2, child number 3 actually. So this one, maybe I can copy and paste just to keep the files, keep the previous code actually. And I'm going to use align self, and I'm going to align it at the center. I'm going to save, go back, see that. So this is the individual items are getting aligned across the cross axis, right? Maybe if you want to align, let's try one example with a column also, right? So maybe I'll remove this code for now. Okay, let me remove this one also. I'm just commenting, and we are at the initial state now. Now I'm going to use column this time. So I'm going to use column, and once I give flex direction as column, my children are going to get aligned in the vertical direction. Now my main axis is a y axis, okay, and my cross axis is x axis. So align self, what it does, align self align across the cross axis. Now in our case, the cross axis is x axis. So these children are going to align individually across the x-axis. This is a bit confusing, but that's okay. So let's target individual child. Probably again I'll target child 2, and this time, okay, maybe I'll target child 2 first, and I'm going to use align self again, and this time I'm going to align flex end only. Let's see what happens. See that? Because my cross axis is x-axis, it's getting aligned here. Let's target child number 3. I already have align self. I'm going to just uncomment it, save. See that? It's aligned at the center. So this is really, really important property, flex align self, and you're going to use this property so many times while laying out your child, individual child. Let's move on and talk about the last property for the flex child. Okay, now let's talk about the last child property of Flexbox, and this is the last property of this video. And that's called flex. And a bit confusing, right? We're talking about display flex, and the name of the property is flex. I think they should think about changing the name of this property. But this is a really easy property. This is just a shorthand of the existing properties which we have learned previously in this video. So it's a shorthand for flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis combined. Now let's see how we can use it. So I'm going to go back to my code, and probably I need to reset some of the values. So I'm going to comment it. I'm going to comment this one too. Okay. And let me save and go back and see how my application is behaving. Okay, I have display as flex and display flex direction as columns. I'm going to change it. I'm going to change everything actually. I'm going to remove this also. I want to go with the default, the initial setup. Okay, so first of all, I mean, before moving forward, I'm going to give this, I'm going to use align items for my container, and I'm going to align it to the flex start. I'm going to save it, and that's going to remove that stretch in the vertical direction. Okay, so now let's talk about flex. So I'm going to target my child number 3 probably. Let me target this child, and I'm going to use flex property. But before that, I'm going to give some width to my child number 3. So let's give it a width of 10 rem and I'm going to save. See that? It got some width. Now I'm going to use flex, and flex is a combination of flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. And what's the default value? Default value is 0, 1. So flex shrink is on, and auto. So I'm going to go with these values and I'm going to save, and you won't see any difference here, right? Now, if I resize my screen, you can see the child 3 is getting shrinked. Okay, so now I'm going to use different flex values just to demonstrate to you. So I'm going to comment this one and I'm going to use flex. First, let's start with grow. I'm going to keep the value of grow as 1, 1, auto. So flex grow is 1, flex shrink is off, and flex basis is auto. So whatever width that child has, it's going to take that, and that's 10 rem. You see that? So now, now the item has grown, right? It's overriding the width of the item. So width is 10 rem, but it's overriding because I have given flex grow as 1. Now I'm going to comment this and let's move on and let's try to shrink this time. Okay, so I'm going to make shrink off and I'm going to keep the basis value as auto. Now I'm going to refresh once again and now let's see what happens. See that? See that? So initially flex grow, because of flex grow, the child has taken the available space. But the child has a width also. It has a width of 10 rem. And I have made shrink off, right? Now the shrink is off because I have set 0. So now when I'm resizing my screen, you see that the item is not shrinking, but it's having its actual width. I'm going to commit this one also. And let's try one more value, flex. I'm going to keep grow probably and shrink off. And this time I'm going to remove the width and I'm going to give it a width of some basic value, some flex basis value, right? So I'm going to use 10 rep. So, and I'm going to switch off the flex grow value also. So 0, 0, 10 rem. So 10 rem is a flex basis value. So that will be the initial width of that particular item. See that? It has that width, and if I shrink it, it's not shrinking. So this is how you can use combination of different values for flex. It's a shorthand for flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis combined. And I have given you some of the examples also, which you can experiment by yourself. So practice, and practice is going to make you perfect. So I think I'm going to stop here because we are done with all the CSS Flexbox container properties and items or children properties. So if you like this video, please hit that like button, and you can even subscribe to my channel. You can share my video with your friends and family who wants to learn CSS Flexbox. CSS Flexbox is really great tech addition in CSS. So I feel this video would be a great reference manual, or not a manual, but reference video whenever you want to learn CSS Flexbox. So I think I'm going to stop here. I'm going to see you in the next video. Please comment below this video, give me some feedback, give me some suggestions, or you can suggest me the topics where you want to see uh, the upcoming videos. So I'm going to see you in the next video. Until then, goodbye and take care.